We often fantasize about how awesome tour life is and how it's like the pinnacle of every disc golfer's dream, but often the reality is much worse than you might think. So today I wanted to break it down, the highs, the lows, and everything in between as a tour life player. And before we get into it, be sure to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Step 1, traveling on tour. With all the events scattered about the US and even Europe, you often have to drive multiple days with you or a friend, having to drive sometimes 20 plus hours, and in rare cases driving overnight just to get one round in before the actual event starts. And if you want to get multiple practice rounds in, you may probably have to leave immediately after your final round ends at the previous event when you're already probably really tired. And you may often think, oh yeah, pros sleep in hotels, like I'm sure it's not really that bad. But that is very much not the case for the majority of players because basically everyone lives out of a van. And for a lot of pros, they don't even have the ability to live out of their own van, they have to live with somebody else. So you're having to live in a very tight environment with somebody else, which is definitely not the most glamorous life by any means. But the reason why that is because there's so few players actually making above $40,000 a year. The majority of players do not really make that much, which essentially puts them at the median income for US, which is by no means the poverty line, but it is definitely not enough to really splurge on anything besides the necessities. So unless you are one of the top names making over 100K, you're probably going to be living on tour in a much rougher manner than you might think. Now with that said, some people love van life, they don't mind it, they actually kind of thrive on it, and they like to travel, always on the go, never having to worry about where you're going to sleep because you just know, hey, I'm going to sleep in my van. It's all good. But for most people, that is probably not the most glamorous life. And then as far as media, they have dozens of cameras, tripods, batteries, and in addition to having to carry all this stuff, you have to make sure your batteries are charged, SIM cards are cleared, and you have to test for redundancy because this is a live event, so there are no redos, no mess ups. Basically, you have to get the shot right or nobody else will see it. But unlike players, media is often staying in hotels or Airbnbs. So still not the peak of glamorous life, but much better, at least in my opinion, than sleeping in a van every night. But as somebody that has traveled months on end, I can certainly guarantee you that living every single night on the go is definitely not the most fun. But with that said, at least according to ZipRecruiter, the average salary is between $50,000 to $70,000, with the higher positions getting closer to $200K. So definitely way better than players, but oftentimes not that much with the amount of time and effort required to do this job. And along with that, the majority of the film crew is actually contractors doing an hourly rate, which is probably not sustainable to do as a full-time gig. So with that, let's go to tournament preparation. So when you actually get to the event, there's oftentimes so many variables that come into play that you may not actually get a good round in. It might be windy, it might be rainy, it might be cold, you might spend literally every 3 minute traveling, so you may not even have the time to practice. And then if you do practice, it may be too busy to practice properly. And so even though you may have done everything right, you may only get the opportunity to throw one hole with a couple of discs, and that is the only prep that you have before a 3 to 5 round tournament. Now obviously these are touring pros, so they're experts at doing that exact task, but it is still by no means an easy thing, especially when conditions can flip the very next day. Now the one thing that I noticed after watching so many pros, especially in this practice round, was how the overall vibes of basically every player was just chill confidence. Every single player didn't look stressed one bit. Every time they threw their shot, it was either perfect or about 80% of what they wanted. There was nobody truly making fluky shots, which is kind of crazy because a lot of these holes require so much confidence and trust in the disc that not messing up is truly an astounding skill that I still cannot really wrap my head around, because they throw with basically like 95% accuracy of the shot they want, whereas I'm throwing with like maybe 60%. Very much a totally different game to what I'm playing. But I think it really goes to show that repetition, getting your form right, and making sure you feel confident in your throw is really the most important thing. And one other funny side note is that whenever they throw like the perfect shot, I feel like so often the case, their response is like just a subtle shrug, like, yeah, I parked it, 450, no big deal, whatever. And while it is probably routine to them, it is still crazy to watch. But one other side note is that they often have to do media interviews, skins matches, their own content, so they're having to film while they're doing their practice round, which makes it all the more stressful because they cannot just focus on their round, they have to focus on so many other obligations, which again, this is their job, they're pros, they do this every weekend, so it's probably not that big of a deal, but it is just one more thing to put on their plate, making it all the more difficult to truly get good practice in. Next up, let's talk about the actual tournament itself. So for players, especially FPO, they have to get up very early, sometimes 6 a.m. or earlier, having to get ready, stretch, practice, play the round, which can often be 3 to 5 hours, oftentimes fraught with backups, weather delays, wind conditions that flip in minutes. There are often so many different variables that might change for your particular round. Now again, they are pros, this is what they do every day, but there are so many more variables than you might think. And especially if you are on league card, there are oftentimes a lot of cameras on you. So at one point in time, you may have 5 people recording your shot. And especially the most seasoned pros, they oftentimes look at the live cameraman to be like, hey, am I good to throw? And I think that is just such a weird awareness to have, that you have to throw on somebody else's time. You can't throw in your own cadence because you have to make sure that they're recording and then you can throw. Now, they've probably done this hundreds of times, but it's still not an easy thing to be aware of. And not only that, but you have the constant awareness of fans watching every single move you have, which can certainly bring a level of intensity that you might not think about if you're just watching on live. And another thing that I've noticed is that basically every player has like an internal timer in their head, and they have to like rip it out of their hands within 10 seconds. It feels like they throw so much faster than everybody else. And I'm not talking about RPM. I think they literally throw in half the time that a normal player throws. And maybe this is just a symptom of how much repetitions they've had. They don't have to really think about their shot. They don't have to line it up because they just know. But especially on the cards that weren't being filmed, they basically threw every shot in under 5 seconds, which is not something I see anyone else do in my tournament rounds. And along with that professionalism, they also have such casual, chill vibes the entire round. Sure, they may flip out after one bad shot, but the ability to recover after that shot is so very evident with so many of these pros. Sure, you have the players that rage and get tilted, but for the majority of players, they really do have the ability to forget the last shot. No matter how good or bad it was, they have the ability to be like, whatever, my next throw is the most important one and I'm going to focus on that. And you can certainly tell that the Pauls and Simons can really do that well, which really allows them to not stress about a 60-footer and really jam it in. Now onto the media side, so they oftentimes have to get up even earlier because they have to get stuff set up. They have to be ready for the first chase card, which can oftentimes mean that they have to be at the event, sometimes nearly as early as 5:30 a.m., which is a very long day when you have to film sometimes as late as 7 o'clock. And of course, they have to check every single bit of equipment, make sure it's all charged, all cleared up on memory cards, a good reception if you're trying to get live, but not only that, but the ability to have so much awareness on the course. So you have to know every single sight line, make sure you know the best place to film every single shot, and especially if you're recording the chase cam, you have to have a very efficient ability to traverse from one hole to the next. You don't have any time to delay. You have to make sure you get from one hole to the next without bothering the next card, but also have enough time to angle the camera to make sure you get the right shot. And because there is no ability to redo shots, you have to make sure you're on it every single shot, every single round. And because there is so many cameramen, especially on league card, sometimes you're working around 5 other cameramen, which can get a little bit crazy, especially on these wooded holes. But then if you are filming live, you also have to communicate with the DG in studio, making sure you get the right shot, making sure if you're on chase card, communicating, hey, this player made this shot, make sure to get that on coverage, which allows them a good record of every single shot that happened and making sure every shot is known to the booth. So it really is a full team effort requiring the communication of sometimes upwards of 10 plus people just to get a couple of shots, especially when there are those moments where you have lead card, chase card, and some other cards doing insane stuff. So while you may certainly have the perspective that DGN is really not that good of a product, I can certainly tell you that they are trying hard and it is very much felt in the level of professionalism seen at the event. Now that is by no means saying that is the best product that they could have. There are so many places for improvement, and I'll be the first one to say it, but all in all, I do think they spend so much effort just getting the right shots. And just some funny tidbits, as somebody that filmed every single round at Jonesboro and Champions Cup, the product that you see on stream is oftentimes so different than what is actually being recorded. Especially first round, it is oftentimes so sparse that it literally is just me and the DGN team. And so there are oftentimes no spectators, nobody watching. It is really just a couple players and a bunch of film crew. And what I found hilarious is that even at Champions Cup, which you would expect a lot of people to be at, there was literally 5 spectators at FPO. Now this was after weather delay, but still just a crazy feeling to be at a major on league card and only have a couple of spectators. But it really goes to show that the sport is still just so very small and it takes a lot of time to get to the actual growth that we expect it to be. And another showcase of this is that by having a media pass, I was able to do part of the press conference. And let me tell you, they frame it up perfectly. It still feels just a little bit ratchet and just like hilariously low key with one big camera facing the player, but everywhere else around the shot is a bunch of cords, a bunch of tape, but the end product is so professional and so good looking, and it is especially carried by Brian Earhart, who really is just so goated and brings so much to the broadcast. I really cannot explain how much of a good presence he is on tour. Speaking with nearly everyone, it feels like he's just so nice and caring, and while he may ramble from time to time, I think he has such a high ability to connect with players and fans and really showcase all the good parts about disc golf. But along with my filming, I really had the ability to film so many crazy shots that no one else saw besides the players. And let me tell you, it is insane. Even the players that are 70th place still throw ridiculously good shots, with with a lot of these players jamming in 60 footers like it's nothing. Even if you are on 4th card, you're still probably one of the greatest disc golfers around, and the distance is just so very palpable, especially in the sound of the disc. I know people talk about it a lot, but that pop of the disc when you release and the sound of it cutting through the wind, it's just so very bizarre because it literally sounds like a rocket rocketing towards the basket. But besides all the crazy shots, the most incredible thing that I saw was the tonal shift from everyone else to final round, league card, and PO. It is insane how much the entire event really shines, especially in those moments. There are so many spectators, so many people caring about this particular set of players who oftentimes may not even be that relevant if there are chase card people fighting for a hot round in the final round. But unless there are some like Paul Ricky cards, the majority of people are watching this one singular round, and it becomes so very obvious why there are those moments where less well-known players struggle in those final round moments. You have so many people watching every single shot that you throw, and it brings about so much stress. You have to worry about foot faults, time violations, so many things that come into play that you may not really think about when you're just throwing on like 4th card. But then when your round ends, you go to like a signing booth, and it is a little bit hilarious because I think if you're on like the PGA Tour, you probably have like 100 people asking for signatures. Here, it is very much not that. It is kind of hilarious because the majority of players maybe get 2 to 5 people asking for signatures, and it just really goes to show that the sport is just so very small, even when us diehard fans feel like it is so much more. Going to these events and watching every single shot, every single round, I can really tell you firsthand that this sport is by no means a big sport yet. I like it that way. I'm very appreciative that it is not a major big sport. It is very much felt how small of an event this truly is, with the exception of Worlds, which is just totally crazy. So last up, let's talk about after the event. So the entire community is so small, so tight-knit that basically everyone knows everyone. They oftentimes hang out with mostly everyone too, with the exception of a couple players like Simon. He obviously has to go back home, but because everyone is so tight-knit, there's a bit of a feeling that you can't really speak against anyone because you will most certainly interact with them in the near future, so you really cannot speak out too much because it very much is sometimes a high school vibe where information travels very fast, and if one person says something about another person, that might spread to them in under an hour. Now, I don't think there's oftentimes drama with that, but there is oftentimes this feeling that you can't really speak honestly about another player because it'll most certainly get back to them. And if you are not hanging out with other people after a round, you probably are just going to go to your van or hotel and just sleep because the responsibilities of a player really are not that much. Sure, you have to train, practice, make sure you get to your events, but when your event or round is over, you probably are not doing much besides maybe a post on Instagram and communicating with your sponsors. So while there are players that grind and do a lot more than this, I would say this is the norm, where when you are done with your event, you don't really do much. Unless you are traveling to your next event where you may be doing some sightseeing, but that is still kind of an anomaly. And with that said, since so much of tour is on the go, traveling, going to the same events year after year, not making a whole lot of money, the whole tour can feel so incredibly monotonous, which makes it all the more surprising that all these touring pros come back year after year. There are so few players that truly quit, and that makes me think that they really do love the sport and they value this insane experience on tour way more than making money. Because a lot of players, for instance, like Calvin has like a computer science degree, I think, he could make a lot more money than just being on tour. But I think there really is something nice about going on tour, playing the sport that you love, and making a living out of it. Sure, it may not be the highest amount of money, but there's so many good experiences that come with this. And from my perspective, as I see it, it is by no means an easy life, but I think if you do it well, do it properly, make sure you train but not overtrain, and are fighting for a competitive finish every event, I can certainly see why this would be such a fun endeavor year after year. But with that said, every year the sport gets more and more legitimate. So while it still may feel very, very small now, in a couple of years' time, I definitely expect it to grow more closely to a mainstream sport, for better or for worse. So with that said, as I've laid it out, do you actually think you would enjoy being on tour? Do you think you would enjoy living in a van every single night of your life? And do you think you could live on under 40K a year? I would love to know what you guys think, and be sure to comment down below, and be sure to subscribe. Wild Runs, signing out, peace.